Hello, welcome back. So for today, we're going to be talking about shield maidens. This article was taken from Live Science on Facebook. I'd like to implore any academics who happen upon this to take note and please begin to look upon these written sources, archaeological and material data finds with a clean and more professional eye. Realize that you are placing a double standard on these female-related finds and speaking in derogatory terms, which I truly believe you don't even realize you're doing. Women have played an incredibly interesting role and an important role throughout history. We rise, we conquer, we fight as men do sometimes. When it happens, there is no need for caveats. There is no need to always say it was rare or unheard of, because it's not unheard of. It's heard of. It is attested to. It is historically documented, and you do not do or say such things when it pertains to a man. So let's stop. Let's acknowledge the literature and the data we actually have, with a real and viable mind of a scientist, so that our students can see and feel the real impact women have had and not think it's rare. It is a scientific injustice. Thank you, and I hope you all enjoy enough to support my channel. I have just received permission to read a 186-page paper on folklore in Old Norse that was written by multiple professors at the University of Tartu. It will be a big, huge upcoming project that will take me many months to complete. I'll release it in multiple parts, but I hope you'll stay tuned and watch those. I think it will be important in understanding how the sagas work and what they mean. So let's get on to shield maidens. The very climate around the topic, did shield maidens exist in the Norse society, is, to say it mildly, toxic. People are falling all over each other to explain it away that women were buried with weapons. This instead of looking at the evidence. Of course, no one knows to what extent these women were warriors, or if taking part in battle. How so? The stories in the sagas say they took part on equal footing with men, though. There are mentioned several shield maidens by name. Recent years of findings have also shown evidence from archaeology where women were both buried with weapons and had battle wounds. One such was found in Solor in Norway. She was buried on a shield with weapons. Her bones showed signs of extensive horse riding and bow shooting. Though without battle wounds to the bones, the Birka woman is also worth mentioning, though she was without visible battle wounds. This because she was held up as a typical male warrior burial before we found out she was in fact a woman. So if we are not to see her as a warrior, what is she then? And would that not mean we have to take a new look at the so-called male burials we say are warriors? If she is not a warrior, what are the males with similar content in their graves then? The trouble lies in the fact that to this day, we automatically assume that people buried with weapons have to be male. This we cannot say for sure, since many graves in the Norse area are cremations, hence no evidence, and recent years of looking at new of the findings makes it apparent that it is not that simple. Males are found with what we consider female items and vice versa. In the sagas of Iceland and that of Gesta Danorum, History of the Danes by Saxo Grammaticus, several Shieldmaidens are mentioned by name. In Book 7, mentioning King Sigar and his children, he discusses this and not just as mentioned by name and their legend, but also in length the tradition of Shieldmaidens. He explains this after telling a Shieldmaiden Alfhild of Gotland. Gotland, the Danish prince Alf, son of Sigar, wants to marry. Alfhild is a daughter of a king of Gotland, Sigurd. So that no one should be surprised that this weaker sex went after warlikeness, I will make a little sidestep to briefly account for such women's wills and customs. In ancient days, there were women among the Danes who transformed their feminine beauty into a manly being and used almost all their time in martial sports, so that their bravery would not be dulled by the contagion of luxury. For they hated all kinds of voluptuous living and constantly hardened body and soul by endurance and exertion, and by renouncing all the softness of female weakness. They forced the female soul to submit to male cruelty and put such a keen wind on the warlike nature that one would be tempted to believe they were no longer a woman. It is especially those who had strong souls or were distinguished by slender, tall bodies who used to enter that life, as if they forgot the vessels in which they were born and preferred harshness to kind words. They offered battle instead of caresses, thirsted for blood and not for kisses, laid down rather for the sports of war than for the sports of love, and crossed spears in their hands they should have used at the loom, though not of the bridal bed, but of death, and attacked with sharp weapons the men whom they could have delighted with their beauty. Now I return from this excursion and pick up the thread again. Earlier in Gesta Danorum, History of the Danes, Svipdag and Guthrum, Book 1, he states, as I occasionally come to talk about such ghosts or otherworldly beings and their enterprises, and I do not want to be known to publish anything too truthful that is contrary to the truth or common popular belief, I consider it worthwhile to tell here that in the old days there were 3 different kinds of vetyr, sorceress, who practiced many strange miracles by magic. Here again he talks of the beliefs and practices of the Danes from the pre-Christian times, such as that of the vulva, sorceress, vatyr, otherworldly beings, in the beliefs and why he finds need to explain these things. He is addressing the people of the 12th and 13th century, literary elite of the High Middle Ages, but he writes down the orally told stories of the Danes that he grew up with and were part of himself. An example of this is, when he had sung this stanza, poetry, he took hold of his sword with both hands, threw his shield on his back, and fell down on his feet, heedless of any danger. King Hadding then called his guardians to help, and immediately Vegenhoft, Jotun, but could also be his Fjölja or other beings, came and fought in this Vilkling. When Asmund saw the giant's crooked sword, he raised his voice loudly and quavered. Not your Galvind benefit you, troll, even if you, rune, have carved on it witchcraft. Not hero's cow, believe me, fool, trolls can be tamed. Trolls in Danish, trold, and related to the word trill, meaning to do magic. So troll here can simply mean a magical being or to do magic. In Danish, another word for magic is trolldom. This is also what it means when you carve runes on it. You make the sword stronger by carving runes. Alf had slain a dragon or snake, a creature often part of the Norse mythological stories and sagas. Of course, this is not to be taken literal, but is to show his manliness. After this, Saxo explains. When he now demanded the salary that had been promised for the victory, Sivert said that he would only take it to his son-in-law, whom his daughter herself freely chose. The girl's mother was the only one who did not look favorably on his courtship and explored her daughter's mind in a secret conversation. When the latter eagerly praised him for his bravery, she reproached her severely, because she relaxed her chastity and allowed herself to be captivated by enticing glances, and, without asking about his virtue, with a light-hearted mind cast her eyes on the foolish allurements of beauty. When Alvida took contempt for the Danish bachelor, exchanged her woman's clothes for men, and turned from a most leaden virgin into a grim Viking. After taking several like-minded girls into her service, she happened to come to a place where a group of Vikings were mourning the loss of their chief, who had fallen in battle. Because of her skill, they made her their chief, and she performed exploits far exceeding what could be expected of a woman's courage. Saxo writes the story down in late 12th century and early 13th century. Who was Saxo? Only very few sources contain information about Saxo. We know from the contemporary Danish chronicler Svend Aggesen that Saxo worked on his manuscript around 1190. Archbishop Absalon had personally told Svend Aggesen that. The next information about Saxo in the contemporary sources is found in Archbishop Absalon's will from 1201. The other contemporary information we have about Saxo comes from his own hand, i.e., what he either directly or indirectly wrote about himself in the Gesta Danorum. According to Saxo himself, both his grandfather and father were members of Valdemar the Great's Hird warrior retinue. Thus it can be established that Saxo's family was of a noble family, which for several generations had been among the allies of the ruling Valdemar dynasty. He explains, moreover, with the obedience that has been handed down to me from ancient times, I have decided that I will fight for you, if nothing else, than with the weapons of the spirit. It is true that my father and my grandfather served your illustrious father as faithful warriors. The dynasty of Valdemar was descendant of Gorm of the Old, and according to the sagas also descendant of that of Skilding dynasty described by Saxo, also mentioned in that of Skjoldunskjen, the saga of the Skildings and Beowulf. Though Saxo is a monk and educated in Europe, he has his base in the old Danish noble family and is a supporter of the Danish royal house as well. Saxo's source material was thus the ancient and contemporary historical literature together with the limited Nordic historical literature, Old Nordic legends, and oral accounts of people's experiences. Saxo's Gesta Danorum was addressed to the literary elite of the High Middle Ages, thus also why he finds the need to explain the customs of Shieldmaidens as he does. The custom seems to point to unmarried women being allowed to take up arms as a shield maiden. As soon as they became married, they no longer seem to have been warriors, at least not as they are described in the stories. Saxo is not the only one to mention these women. Though the stories about them are fewer than the exploits of the men, they do hold a prominent role in the stories. In the saga of Hervor and King Heidrek, the daughter of the famous berserker Agantyr also takes on male clothes. It seems to point to being woman of a higher status that has this option or can be trained in weapons. Though, of course, most stories are about the aristocracy and that of royals, so that can perhaps explain that. As for foreign sources mentioning women fighting, we have several examples of that also outside the Norse area. Boudica of the Celts, Boudicca. We have several examples to take from throughout history. From the records of the Byzantine historian, we have the mention of women fighting in the battle when Sviatoslav of Kiev attacked the Byzantines in Bulgaria in 971. Here he speaks of the Varangians, though we are not to take it as the Varangian Guard. They were Norse, though. We do know that the women could take on high status property, conduct businesses, and she could in fact also take on the farm if the man died before her. She had the right to divorce, and her status did not lessen due to this. All in all, women in the Norse era had more rights and opportunities than their counterparts in the Christian area of Europe. With these things put together, there is not a far leap to think that some became warriors, as the sagas and stories in fact tell us they did. About the woman from Solor. We should be mentioned that her skeleton also showed signs of extensive horse riding and bow shooting. This can be seen as changes to the bones. When the sword came down upon her head, the blade cut her to the bone. Scientists studying the woman's fractured skull 1,000 years later still aren't sure whether the blow actually killed her. However, the trove of weapons buried with her make it clear that she died a warrior nonetheless. The Viking who lived and died around the year 900 was first excavated from a farm in Solor, Norway, in 1900. Her head rested on a shield. A bridled horse skeleton lay curled at her feet, and her body was boxed in by a sword, spear, battle axe, and arrows. When a quick analysis revealed the skeleton to be female, it was immediately interpreted as the first physical example of a shield maiden. The woman was about 18 or 19 years old, with a strong jaw, swollen eye, and a forehead that's seen better days. According to the team's analysis of the warrior's skull, the maiden suffered a serious head injury consistent with a sword strike. However, the wound showed signs of healing that may not have been the ultimate cause of her death. Again, this was from Live Science on Facebook. That is the end. Thank you. Please reevaluate your feelings on shield maidens and their existence, because they were real, and the material data is bearing that out. So, time to have a little mind change. Thank you. Please subscribe.